Okay, today's date is 12 May 2023. I'm in Washington, D.C., and I have the pleasure to sit down with John McGee. Thanks, sir. Appreciate you sitting down and talking to us.
My pleasure.
All right, if we could just start with some background information. Where were you born, grow up, go to school, that kind of thing?
Born in Boston, Massachusetts. Last son of Joseph Patrick and Louise McGee. My dad was 55 when I was born. My mother was 46. I was a surprise. Everybody else was, all my brothers and sisters were fully grown when I was born.
Okay.
Went to school, high school in Boston, Boston Technical High School. Normal kid, played baseball, football were my two favorite sports, and did well academically. Graduated in 1967. So, but when I senior year in high school, decided I wanted to enlist in the United States Army, and became what they call the delayed enlistment program in February of 1967. Graduated in June of 67. 10 days later was in basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, in 1967.
What made you decide that you wanted to join the military, and why did you pick the Army?
First of all, I'd always wanted to be a soldier. Everybody wants to be a baseball player, football player. I knew I was going to play for the Boston Red Sox. I couldn't replace Ted Williams. But there was something about it that I always wanted to be a soldier. And I loved military history, read about it. Of course, although my dad didn't fight World War II, he was too old. I had brothers-in-law and uncles and cousins who did fight in World War II. I mean, we were the boomers. We were the next generation. We were brought up by what we now call the world's greatest generation, the World War II veterans. Our other cousins fought in Korea. So at 17, 18 years old, it was my turn, I thought, to go defend my country. My country was engaged in a war, not a conflict, a war, and it was my turn. And I was torn between the United States Marine Corps and the Army, but I wanted to become a paratrooper. I wanted the idea of jumping out of airplanes. I liked the idea of being an Army Ranger, and I actually wanted to go Special Forces. So the Army offered me more opportunities in that way. So that's why I went. I enlisted in the Army.
How about family members? You said World War II, your father.
My father's too old. He was because he was born in 1893. So World War II come along. He was too old. Okay. My younger brother had served in the Air Force in peacetime. Both of my brother-in-laws, both of my sister's husband. One was a door gunner on a B-17, crew chief in a B-17 during Europe, and the other one was in the Navy in the Pacific from 1941 to 1945.
I got you.
So. And cousins, I had cousins in Korea, Marines who were in Korea. So, and the neighborhood I grew up in was a blue-collar neighborhood. A lot of those guys, my best friend's father was a Marine who had seen Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, Tarawa. These were the fathers we grew up around.
Right.
So this is who we were,
Yeah. So obviously Vietnam is going on. Did you want to go to Vietnam?
Volunteered.
I'm sorry.
Volunteered.
So you were,
Airborne. I know when I enlisted Airborne Ranger unassigned, I was going to
You
Vietnam.
were going to Vietnam. Okay. All right. Tell us about the training to be a ranger.
Well, the unique part about it is I enlisted for the training. First, you have to go. I went through your basic training. Then I went through what they call Airborne Infantry Advanced AIT, or Advanced Infantry Training.
Okay.
From then I went to jump school. But during basic training, I took a OCS test, Officer Candidate School test. Passed it, but I was only 18, so I couldn't go to OCS until I was like 19, 20 years old. But it was in my record, so I didn't think about anything about it. So I enlisted to go to Ranger School. So after jump school, I thought I was going to get orders to go to Ranger School. Okay? Well, the Army, being the Army and its ultimate wisdom, said no, and this bus showed up at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was told to get on a bus, pack and get on a bus, and they took us out to the 11th Student Battalion. 11th Student Battalion, and I went to Non-Commissioned Officers Candidate School. What the Army had done is they had, because of the shortage of Vietnam, senior NCOs in Vietnam after the first tours in Vietnam, a lot of the senior NCOs left. So they had to move up junior NCOs. So your E5s and E6s were now E6s, E7s, and E8s. Well, it created a vacuum at the lower NCO rank, non-commissioned officer rank. So the Army, in its infantry, took the officer candidate school, which was geared to be an infantry platoon leader, a platoon of 40 guys. They geared that school down to squad leader level, meaning 11 men. You're 11 guys in an infantry squad. And they called that non-commissioned officers candidate school. It was 21 weeks long. I started out as an E2, and if you graduated, you became an E5. The top graduated became an E-stiff, a staff sergeant. What we also didn't find out is that if you graduated in the top 5% of your class, and I found this out later doing a research paper, that if you graduate in the top 5% of your class, you are going to be tagged to become a member of a long-range patrol team. We didn't know what a long-range patrol team was when we were training. Had no clue, okay? Asked somebody once, and they said, you'll find out when you get there. But basically what they did for us, we did extra patrolling, extra small unit tractors, patrolling. Graduated the school, was a buck sergeant, got orders to go to Vietnam, showed up May in '68 in Vietnam at the 90th Replacement Depot in Saigon, had orders to go to Company F, 50th Infantry Long Range Patrol, part of the 25th Infantry Division. And that's where I went. We were called shake and bakes, or instant NCOs.
Okay. So you were airborne certified,
Mm-hmm.
and but you weren't a ranger at the time.
No.
Okay.
The Lurp companies were not ranger companies. The Lurp companies, the history of the Lurp companies is very quickly. The original Lurp companies were provisional, long-range reconnaissance patrol. During the early part of Vietnam, Special Forces, 5th Special Forces, the original Special Forces Operation Delta, the original Delta teams, ran these what they call B-36, B-52 teams. Now these were small 5-6-man teams that went deep into North Vietnam gaining intelligence. So the Army decided that every division should have one of these units because there was a new war for the United States Army. It wasn't like World War II or Korea. So we needed on-the-ground intelligence. So they started these Lurp companies, long-range reconnaissance patrol. Basically, their job was to go out, hide, look for the VC, look for the North Vietnamese, report back so that they could send out bigger units or call in artillery strikes or air strikes. Well, that lasted for about almost a year. And then the Army decided, well, we like these units, so we have to give them authorization. So they created what they call the Table of Organization and Equipment. The Lurp companies now, we became F Company 50th Infantry because they had to give us an infantry regiment designation, long range patrol. And they slightly changed the missions. We were more offensive. Sometimes we would go out and look to ambush more than they did. So we became more offensive. That lasted from about late 67 till February of 1969. The Lurp companies, the long-range patrol companies, rather. And in February of 1969, the United States Army designated every one of the 14 Lurp companies in country as part of the 75th Infantry Ranger Regiment. We now became F Company 75th Rangers. History of the Lurp. Again, the mission changes. The companies get bigger because we only had 100 men in our company when I was there. We only had 2 platoons. Companies got bigger, more equipment. Their mission again changed, more offensive in their mission. They still had the long-range sneak missions going in by ourselves in the 5- and 6-man patrols, but now they would take 14, 15-man, what we called hatchets, tomahawk teams, go out and look to attack, look to ambush.
So describe your first impressions when you get to Vietnam.
Hot. I wasn't shocked. It was hot. You know, coming from the city of Boston and you go to an Asian country, of course that hits you right away. The odors, the smell is different because this is a third world country. Military buildup was unbelievable. I mean, you know, and it's funny as you're coming off the airplane, you land in Tonsanut in a Freedom Bird, and as you're coming off the airplane and we were in khakis, Class B's and khakis. We're walking up to be processed in, and of course you got a plane load of guys leaving, and okay, they're swearing at you, they're calling you effing new guy and all this other stuff, and you'll regret it, yada yada, all this other stuff, and laughing at you. But when I got to the 90th Republic in Saigon, I mean, it was a big military organization. I mean, it was run efficiently. You knew it was. When I got to the 25th, I knew what I was going to do. It wasn't a surprise to me. I knew that I was going to a Lurp company, and by then I had known what a Lurp company was and a Lurp unit was. So it wasn't surprised, you know.
What did you know about Vietnam prior to being there, or about the war in general?
Well, you know, again, I'm a history guy. I like history, so I knew that the country was part of what they call the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which is a lot like NATO, except it had to do with Southeast Asia. I know that that Vietnam was going through the same thing that Korea went through. North Vietnam was basically, we looked at it as the same way as North Korea. Of course, the Vietnam, and again, because I'm a history guy, I saw the French fought in the French Indochina War, fought what they called the Viet Minh then. The Viet Minh was led again by Ho Chi Minh, who, by the way, was he was when he was in college was a waiter at a Chinese restaurant in Boston.
Really?
Ho Chi Minh, yes. But he was the leader of the Viet Minh, and they defeated the French at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, where they defeated the Second Regiment Étranger, which is the French Foreign Legion, the French Paratrooper Legion. So that was a big turning point in that battle, in that war. That ends in about 1953-54. We started to be involved as advisors earlier, probably in the late 40s in Vietnam. And at first we couldn't decide which side we want to be in, the French or the Vietnamese. You've probably thought about this. We've had these problems before. Right. Who are we going to be? Who are we going to back? So eventually we backed the Vietnamese government out of Saigon against Ho Chi Minh, which now the Viet Minh became the Viet Cong. It changed. Same, they were a provisional army of civilian. It was a civilian army, not even a National Guard. It was like a militia more than a National Guard. But of course, North Vietnamese had developed an army by then, a trained army, which was rapidly funded not by so much the Koreans, I mean the Chinese, Communist Chinese. The Russians played a great role in funding the North Vietnamese. Ho Chi Minh was probably more in tune with the Russians than he was with the Communist Chinese at the time. And of course, a lot of us said we were afraid the Chinese were getting into the war, but the Russians were now that history tells us since the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians were running the prisoner of war camps up in Hanoi. The Russians were flying Vietnamese MiGs against our Air Force pilots. The Russians were heavily involved in training and supplying Ho Chi Minh.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you first get in country, what is the indoctrination? How does that work? How do they get you?
Well, of course, the first day for us, because of our background, we went to what they call a 10-day jungle school, and they talk to you about what to expect in the jungle. My favorite thing is, like, I remember sitting in the bleachers one day, and they're talking about snakes, and this crusty E7 stands there and he goes, "There's 100 snakes in Vietnam, 99 are poison, and one will eat you whole." And it was kind of, but snakes were the least of our worries. They talk about what to drink, what not to drink, what patrols are and stuff. I had to be there for 10 days, but basically my training started on the job training when I got to the company. Okay. When I got to the Lurp company, I was treated even though I was a buck sergeant, and I knew eventually I would become a assistant team leader and a team leader. When you first train, you're just an observer. You go out on missions, you're a nobody. You listen to that Spec 4, that private who's been there before, and you learn what to do as a Lurp. How to we operated different from a regular guy in the jungle. I mean, we didn't wear steel pots. All of our equipment, we cut down our equipment as much as possible. We carried a lot of equipment in our mountain rucks, but everything was taped down. Everything, no rattles, all our canteens. We took different things off. We tied things down instead of the clips and stuff. So everything for us was keep silent. So you learned how to do that. You learned how to walk. You learned how we patrolled, how you turned around every couple of meters and checked your back, and that was the training we got. And that's how you learned to become first. For me, it took me about, I guess about a half a dozen missions, and they evaluate you, the team leader and the assistant team leader and the rest of the team. And the company commander and the senior NCOs, because we only had one officer, we were an NCO driven company. So the NCOs would question the team leader and assistant team leader and say, like, is McGee ready to become an assistant team leader? And they'd question the team, and they'd go either a thumbs up or no, he's not ready, he needs more training, or he'll never be ready, okay? Same deal as you get when you become an assistant team leader. How does he act as a team leader? Is he ready to take over a team? Same deal, and eventually you become a team leader. So, and then you're in charge of the four other guys with you.
How many of you are there when you go out on mission?
Usually 5, sometimes 6.
5 or 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
We would go out for 5 to 6 days. We wore mountain rucks. Okay. You would take enough food, sea rations or Lurp rations to try to live for 5 days. And usually we didn't, we only probably ate 1 or 2 meals a day, if even that, because you were moving all the time and you didn't want to carry a lot of food with you. Most of the stuff inside our mountain rucks was extra rounds, magazines, and of course, as an assistant team leader or team leader, you had to carry the radio. The 25 was in your mountain ruck. So everybody else carried a battery, extra batteries. We had 2 claymores in our mountain rucks. We all had claymores. In our pistol, in our uniforms, we'd have 2 white phosphorus grenades, maybe 4 to 6 regular fragment grenades. We carried 6 to 8 canteens, and also attached to the side of our rucks, we'd have usually the two or three big 2-quart canteens. Water was very important, keeping hydrated in the jungle. So we didn't wear steel pots. We didn't wear, most of the time, when we were in base camp, we wore camouflage berets, but when we went on the field, most of the times, we'd wear what we call go-to-hell rags off. Some of the guys had boonie hats. Myself, I wore the go-to-hell rags. It was a lot easier. And we didn't wear underwear, okay? We wore socks, and you brought extra socks because of your feet, but there's no sense in wearing underwear under your fatigues because you'd be soaking wet 1 minute, dry the next minute, so, yeah.
Did you have a specific mission or objective in mind when you guys went out, or was it just find something?
It depended on what the briefing was for, what we were looking for, okay? What we were looking for. If you were looking for, we would get missions, we were told we'd have to go to this battalion or the 3rd Brigade or the 1st, that's 25th ID, and they'd say, okay, we suspect that the 272nd North Vietnamese Regiment is working in this area. So what they would do is, a typical Lurp mission is that either the assistant team leader or the team leader would get on a Huey early in the morning with a pilot. We'd fly over the suspected area and we'd try to pick out what LZs to put us in, PZs and LZs. And when we fly into the missions, what we usually do is you do what they call false insertions.
Okay.
The Huey would drop down, do a false insertion, and we wouldn't get off. But then to pick the LZ, the landing zone that we had picked, then we'd get off the team. Once we get off the team, we'd scatter into the jungle, get out of the way, set up in a circle. Away would go the Huey. Then we would gather together, start reading our maps, using our company, and we'd start trying to move into the area that was suspected. We moved very slowly and as quiet as possible in the jungle because you did not want to give yourself away. Because unfortunately, we were looking for North Vietnamese regiment. A regiment is a couple of 100 guys, 400 guys. And if we ran into what we call contact or we were compromised, it was usually more than 5 or 6 guys. So you didn't want to do that. So basically we had a specific move. We would go set up, and then sometimes one of the things we'd like to do is that we would always stay off of trails. We would never walk on trails, okay? So you try to set up where you'd see either roads or trails come together, and you'd set up back in the jungle, because the North Vietnamese army, because that was their country, they would use trails and roads. They had no problem to do it because this was their country. This is their territory, because they did not suspect us to be out there looking for it. So sometimes it would set up in that, and you'd wait. You'd wait for a couple of days, and sometimes it get very boring. But you'd have to sit there and wait, and then sometimes they would walk right by you. And I mean by right by you, they'd be as close to me as you are. You could smell them, okay? And you'd smell the Nook bomb and the marijuana and everything else that they used, and the hash or whatever they were smoking. But sometimes we'd be out there for 5 days and we didn't see any of it. And then other times you'd walk in on, I will tell you that one time in the Michelin rubber plantation, you know, the Michelin tires. One of the largest rubber plantations in the world is in Vietnam, and that was the Michelin rubber plantation. Rows and rows and rows, miles of rows of dress trees so you had to be very careful walking through there. I will tell you that when we were on a mission, my point man literally fell into a hole, and that was an outpost, an OPLP for a North Vietnamese regiment, and they had just left, probably within about 2 or 3 hours, because the campfire was still warm. So we just froze in place, took a look around, waited, then we called in and told them where there was an abandoned base camp. We watched where the trails where they were moving. We called back, and they pulled us out. They brought in a B-52 strike after that. So that's what the mission, sort of the missions was. Our job was to try to go find them, not to freeze them, just find them, report back to higher headquarters. Their job, higher headquarters, would decide whether to bring in an infantry battalion on an Eagle flight, a whole battalion of U.S. soldiers, 25th ID soldiers, or bring in an airstrike, an artillery strike, or bring in literally a B-52 arc light strike, which was 3 B-52s dropping 1,000-pound bombs.
So you guys weren't intending to
look for contact.
Confront.
No.
You were there to observe and
99% of the time, yeah. Now, occasionally we had what we call ambush missions, where we'd go out and ambush saipans on coming down the Saigon River. But that was not a. We had maybe one or two of those a month, but basically our job was to get intelligence. We did not want to make contact, and unfortunately, sometimes we were compromised by villages. We'd be set up, and a young kid or a woman or an old farmer would walk by us and walk right into us, and the minute that happens, you're compromised. So you got to call the mission, and then what they do is what we call E&E, escape and evade, to another location. The Huey would come in and pick us up with a gunship. Now, if we were in contact, thank God we had direct helicopter support 99% of the time in artillery. We could call in artillery, we could call in attack helicopters. The ones we used were the ones that most of the time that we used in our unit was Delta Troop 3/4 Cav, the Centaurs, and they would come and get us. Their lift units would come and get us, and these guys were unbelievable. There's not a Lurp in the world that doesn't owe his life to an Army helicopter pilot.
Right. What kind of weapons did you carry?
I carried a Car-15. A Car-15 was a smaller version of the M16 submachine gun. So, a lot of grenades.
Okay.
Claymore, a lot of white phosphorus grenades.
Tell me about the first time. So you got all this training, and now you're out, and the very first time in combat, where you're.
I knew that question was coming.
Yeah, you're right there with the enemy. Got to be a little bit of a surreal moment.
Your pucker moment, you mean? It's like it dawns on you. It's like, holy shit, pardon my language, but it's like, holy crap, they're not kidding around. And ours was like, the first time we was like, for me, it was like in dusk. So you started to see the green traces. And so you knew that they would, and like, just like the movie said, Clint Eastwood, the AK-47 makes a distinct sound that you will never forget. And to this day, I will never forget it. Yeah. But was I scared? Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely, you get scared. But you function. You just got to function. It's sort of like they taught you in jump school. And the reason you did it over and over and over again is that when that chute opens, when you jump out of that drawer, the first thing you're doing is counting to 4. And if by 3 you don't hear something, your hand's in it, and it doesn't pop, your hand's in that reserve. I jumped out of a lot of airplanes. So same thing in training. You got to trust your training. And I will tell you that even when my son went to combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, he was in Air Force Security Forces. He said to me, "What's it going to be like?" And I said, "Here's the deal. You're going to have to. You're going to be scared. There's no two ways about it. You're going to have to trust your training. You got to trust who you are. Trust what they told you. And if you got good leadership around and good guys to work with, then thank God. I mean, I think people thought that we were being Lurps. We were crazy. We were nuts. Okay. I just thank God I was in that unit, because we were so small and so tight. We had good soldiers, and they taught us, and everybody had everybody's back. And I'll tell you, I just trusted it. Now, when it's all over, trust me, the adrenaline is just pumping like crazy. And thank God the first firefight, nobody got hurt. And it didn't. You know, you think it lasted a long time, but the first firefight lasted 12 minutes, 15 minutes at the longest. And you get the average firefight for us, we weren't 100 yards away. We were 25 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet away from each other, firing at each other. And we got a couple of those guys, and they got out of there very quickly. And of course, then we started calling, and while we were doing a firefighting, our team leader was on the phone calling artillery, and once the artillery came in, they got out of there. So,
what's the tempo like? Are you guys out constantly, or are there any downtime?
The routine was 4 or 5 days, 5 days, 6 days out there. You would come down, you'd come back, clean your weapon. You had a 24-hour stand down. 24-hour stand down to calm down, relax, and then you went back in rotation again. We were usually out 5, into, back out again. Okay. That was maybe 3, you were down 3, but usually standard the 5 or 6 days, 2 down, back out in the field again, back out in the mission again. Because we only had, like I said, 2 platoons, and there were, I think, 6 teams in each platoon. So we were the divisional Lurps, so we were spread all around, and there were 3 brigades. So you would have to support the 1st brigade, which was in Cu-Chi, 2nd brigade was in Tay Ninh, 3rd brigade was in Dao Tiang. So we supported all the brigades. Now, when I was there, it was after Tet. So by then at Tet, we didn't see a lot of Viet Cong. We saw a lot of NVA. Where we were located, our area of operations was northwest of Saigon, where the Ho Chi Minh Trail came down through Cambodia and Laos. So you'd see a lot of North Vietnamese. We worked in what they call the Iron Triangle war zones, where War Zone 3, War Zone 2, and War Zone 4 came together. Parrots Peak, you probably heard of that in history. Parrots Peak, we were there. The Hobo Woods, the Michelin Rubber Plantation, the Black Virgin Mountain. We saw a lot of North Vietnamese. So we were pretty busy, the 25th ID. Yeah. What's
the difference from your perspective, the boots on the ground perspective, between a Viet Cong and an NVA?
The trained soldier. The Viet Cong was good, they were good, but the Viet Cong was a militia, okay? He was a soldier. He had seen combat, a lot of these guys, and they knew it, but they were rough. I mean, they were civilian soldiers in lots of ways. The North Vietnamese was a trained army. Trained equipment, heavy equipment, good equipment, Chinese Chi-Com weapons, Russian cannons, Russian machine guns. Pretty regimental, okay? And they had good equipment, and they were in pretty good shape. They ate, they looked healthy. There's no two ways about it.
Much better soldier.
Much better soldier, yeah.
So how long are you there before you become a team leader?
Assistant team leader, I think, like I said, 6 missions, so maybe a month and a half, 2 months. Team leader, 4 months, maybe 4 to 4.5 months. Yeah, 4 months. Yeah.
How does your role change once you become?
Well, team leader, now you're in charge. So when you go to the mission, I mean, everybody pays attention when you get to the mission briefing. But when you're the team leader, you're taking the mission briefing. You're talking to the helicopter pilots. You're talking about the flight routes. You're talking about the false insertions. You're talking to what the S3, or the S2, or the S3 of the brigade or the battalion you're working for, what he wants, what we're looking for. Your job is to make sure all the equipment's, it's the leadership you lead from up front. We had a point guy, but I would be the number 2 or 3 guy. You're directing guys. You want to make sure everything, and you just want to make sure everybody comes home. That's the big thing. Get the mission done. Make sure everybody's alive. And the good thing about a Lurp guys, you didn't have to direct fire in a firefight. We knew what we had to do. And most of us, our point guys carried either M79s, and some of them carried sawed-off 12 games with buckshot in them. So our point guys knew right away, lay on fire. Most of us carried car 15, so we would lay down as much fire as possible as soon as possible if we ran into contact. And there was no such thing as 3-round burst. Everything was fully rock and roll. You hit off full auto and you emptied magazines as fast as you could empty magazines and flipping them around. So we laid down fire. Usually also when you change to a team leader, when you're taking fire, you're going to be the guy to call in artillery fire. You're on the phone to artillery, or you're talking to the FAC up in the air if you've got air support, and you're talking back to headquarters, and they're calling in. You're talking to the helicopter gun team that's coming in, and the Huey pilot that's coming in. So it's coming at you.
How's the mindset changed? Because now you're in charge. I mean, you're responsible for guys now. I mean, you're always responsible, but there's a little more. You just there's a responsibility. There's a lot of stress. The best example I can tell you, I guess, comically, is my oldest son when he was a teenager. Now he's an E9 in the Air Force now in the security forces, and he was and they did the same type of mission in Afghanistan and Iraq, as he led patrols in Afghanistan and Iraq. When he was a teenager, I was a little tough on him, okay? And he was kidding me once, and he goes, "You were never a teenager, were you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was 16, but I went in the Army when I was like 17 and a half, 18, so I was 19 years old. I was in charge of 5 other lives, 4 other lives, 6 other lives. I mean, it was like, yeah, you're responsible. It's on you, brother." The unfortunate part of that is when you come back from Vietnam and you think you know everything when you're 19 or 20 years old, and you really don't, but you did. I thought I did at that time. But I was pretty confident, and it gave me the confidence. The one thing about going to jump school and a ranger school and a shake and bake school and the ranger training that I went through, it gave me confidence in what I was doing. I believed, you started to believe in yourself. You had to believe in yourself. And because if you didn't, if you show doubt, it shows in your leadership ability. And you can't question yourself. You've got to, and you're constantly going to do it in time, but don't let it be shown, so. What incidents stand out for you, looking back on that time?
Well, as a company, I just did a thing the other day, and I told you I was interviewed by a news media the other day. His question to me was, "What's a hero?" Okay, I spent 30 years in the military, okay, and I got to serve with a couple of Congressional Medal of Honor winners, okay, and talking to those guys, and they're heroes, and this country throws heroes around, but to me, the heroes, there's 58,000 names that are heroes carved in a wall in granite over here, not too far from where we're located. Those are the heroes of Vietnam, okay, and I'm going to give you an example. And why I call this kid a hero. His name was Hugh Meredith. He was a Spec 4 in the United States Army from Tennessee. He was a Lurp. I didn't know Hugh all that well. I knew him. He was in a different platoon. I was in the 2nd platoon. I was in 1st platoon. One of our missions, our company missions, was to go on the top. The highest point in Vietnam was a mountain called Nui Ba Din, the Black Virgin Mountain. It was about 3,700 feet up in the sky, okay? And that's a mountain in southern Vietnam. We owned the top of that mountain. There was a Special Forces relay radio station. The 25th had radio station up there. It had a detachment to guard the radio stations. The bottom of the mountain, we had fire bases, artillery fire bases. The bad guys owned everything in between. So there were intelligence that there was artillery fire coming down from the mountain down on our artillery bases. So in late July, August of '68, they flew with our whole entire team up that mountain.
both platoons, to the top of them. We sent 14 5 and 6 man teams down the side of that mountain to go look. We found a hospital dug into the side of that mountain, a full-blown hospital, all sorts of tunnel complexes. We found and located 3 of those artillery places. They were literally dug into the mountain. They had metal plates that would lower down. Their Russian 105s would come down, or 106s, and fire down at artillery bases. So that was all dug by this is all North Vietnamese. There was rumor that there was a prisoner of war camp up there. We looked for that, and we thought we saw something that looked like a prisoner of war camp up there, but we weren't sure. Okay. Well, the last day we were going to be there, we were going to leave. The last day, they send the last team out. Now, the last team, they had got a brand new team leader. This kid had just taken over from assistant team leader to a team leader. Well, this young guy, Hugh Meredith, had less than 40 days left in country. Okay. So he knew the team leader. It was his friend. Now, Hugh Meredith, less than 40 days in country, could have said, hey, I don't want to walk point. I'll be in a mission, but I ain't walking point. Well, he had a lot of that team had some new members on it. So Meredith decided he'd walk point for his friend, and because he wanted to protect the younger kids in his team. Well, when we sent a team out, we used the mess hall as a place to sit and stuff, and we had our radios monitoring the team constantly. We were on radio contact with them. You'd have what they call a 15-man ready reaction team, and a 15-man ready reaction team was 15 of us with our weapons, not all of our ruck staff and stuff, but we just had our weapons, our bandoliers, and our pistol belts. And if they were in contact, our job was to get down to them as fast as possible and get them support. They were out on a mission for about, I guess, a couple of 3 hours. We were all sitting around BSing in this mess hall, and guys were playing cards. And then the radio call came in. We're in contact, taking fire, possible KIA, multiple WIAs. So the 15 of us took off right away, grabbed our weapons, grabbed our stuff, down the side of the mountain trying to get to these guys. And when we get there, we get out there and we do a perimeter around them, and we laid a base of fire. There was a couple of young soldiers wounded. Hugh Meredith was laying on the ground. He had stepped on a bouncing Betty, the one you've got out front up there. Bouncing Betty is a mine that pops out of, you step on it, it pops out of the ground about groin height and explodes. He had stepped on one. They had booby-trapped it, the trail, or where he was watching. To this day, I thought he was alive when we still got to him. From his waist down, there was not much left. I can tell you that right now. We did what we did as we were taught to do. We didn't have a stretcher, so we took our machetes, we cut down bamboo, took our pistol belts off, made the base of a stretcher, wrapped it in poncho. We put his body on there. We carried his body up to the side of the mountain to the helipad for the medevac to come and get them, and took the other guys up with it. And as we were running down the trail, running down to get these guys, we all ran by this one place, and about 7 of us ran by, nothing happened. The 8th guy ran by, he set off another booby trap, which was a grenade with a tripwire. The grenade went off, he took shrapnel in the back of his leg. The guy behind him took shrapnel in his chest. The guy behind him took a little shrapnel in his up and around his eyes. So we had 3 wounded from the ready reaction team. We got them all up there, but Meredith that I was carrying the stretcher on the right rear part of the stretcher where his head was located. And I thought I was hearing him moaning, but I didn't know. We got him all the way up to the top of the mountain. We put him on the medevac. We put the other guys on the medevac, and we flew off. We later found out Meredith was dead when we took him up there. He didn't have to do that. He didn't have to walk point. That's a hero. He basically risked his life and gave his life so other guys could live. I don't care how many medals you put on somebody's chest. That guy's a hero. And if there is a Valhalla and there is a God, he better go straight through the gates without even stopping. That to me is a hero.
How about lighthearted moments, humor? To stay sane, I know you gotta
Well, we have
some of that.
our company reunion. My company has usually a reunion every year, and we're a small company, so the total of the 5 years we existed, the Lurps existed from 66 to 71. There's about 700 in the 25th ID. There's less than 5,000 guys in the United States in the history of Vietnam that can call themselves Lurps. There was never more than 1,000 Lurps in country in any year. Okay. So all of our companies are small, so we become close, okay? And even in our reunion, if we didn't even serve, even though we didn't serve at the same years as some of these guys, we're just all brothers, okay? So we get together and everybody says, well, what do you guys do? Tell war stories? You went, no, we don't tell all of, but we'll talk about things like Meredith and what that meant to us and stuff like that, and some of our brothers we lost, but we talk about what you're talking about, the stupid stuff, okay? I got to give you, this is a true story, and people think it's crazy. Middle of a firefight, again on Nui Ba Din one night. We're in the middle of a firefight, and everybody gets down. You get down in a prone position. You hide behind whatever you can, and you start firing. And I hear a blood-curdling scream, and there were some words mentioned that I don't want to say, but it was like, and he goes, he hit this, and I was like, is anybody hit? Is anybody hit? And no hit. And it's like, and I'm like, we couldn't figure out what happened. And it's like, after the firefight was over, and we walked over and to the guy who was there, and he goes, I was like, well, what's wrong, Tommy? I knew it was Tommy Gerber at the time. I thought it was somebody else, and I'll tell you the story. So we go to the reunion, and I thought it was this other kid, Henderson. And we were sitting around the table, and I said, was that Henderson? And Tommy Gerber, his name, he's a Hawaiian guy. He lives in Kona. His nickname is Pineapple. Pineapple goes, no, bro, that's me. I go, Tommy, he goes, goddamn snake, move. He had laid down behind a python. And in the middle of the fight, the python moved. And he let out a blood-curdling scream, and that's a true story.
Right.
And it's like, and then of course after that, everybody starts with the snake stories in Vietnam. It's like, oh yeah, I remember we were I was walking point, and he says, I'm laying in the ground, and this friggin' head comes walking towards me. It's like, screw. So yeah, that's the stupid stuff. Yeah. I was just telling somebody out there, our company area in Cu Chi had a 50-foot rappelling tower. It was painted black, said Ranger on it, and we'd rappel down it, practice rappelling down it. Well, when we were back in home and you weren't on a mission, what we'd do is we'd grab some six-packs and some Jack Daniels or whatever we were drinking, and we'd climb up that rappelling tower, and we'd watch the firefights at night and the B-52s and the Cobras. It was like entertainment, And then, of course, one guy one night got drunk and fell off the damn thing. So yeah, I was like, yeah, that's the funny stuff. And that's the stuff we get together and talk about.
Yeah.
It's therapeutic.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that's the stuff you think about, the stupid stuff.
Any downtime while you're there? Any recreational, or just?
No, I didn't get to, because towards the end of my tour, my dad died, so I didn't do a full tour. The Army, I was on a mission. I'm a team leader then. I'm on a mission. I get a radio call saying the mission's been canceled. E&E to this location on the map. We're going to have a Huey come in and pick you up. Couldn't figure out why they called the mission off. They've done that several times, but I didn't figure, because we hadn't seen anybody yet. So the Huey comes, picks us up. That we fly back to Cu Chi, which was our base camp. And I see the first sergeant in his Jeep. He grabs me and says, McGee, get in the Jeep. And I was a sergeant at the time. He said, get in the Jeep. The old man wants to talk to you. And I'm like, what the heck's this all about? So we drive back to the company area. The company commander at the time says to me, he brings me to his office, like, I report, and I'm in jungle fatigues. Now I've been out there for about 4 or 5 days. I'm smell bad. I got camouflage paint on. I got my jungle fatigues. I got my weapon in my rucksack. And he said, your dad has passed away. Your father passed away. And I went, okay. And he said, you have 20 minutes to go drop your weapon on, grab some stuff, get back out. We're taking you to the helipad. They're going to take you down to, it's going to fly you to Cameron Bay. Cameron Bay, the Red Cross is thinking to bring it home. So basically, I didn't have time to change. I took my
weapon away, took my rucksack off. I didn't even grab any money or anything. I was in a hurry. I didn't know what I was doing. I get on the airplane. They fly me there. I get in a Cameron Bay. I get in a C-141. Stopped in Wake Island, Hawaii, San Francisco. San Francisco, they put me on a commercial flight. They take me I fly into Newark Air Force Base. They drive me to the San Francisco airport. They put me on a TWA flight or something from Boston from San Francisco to Boston. Okay, and I landed in Boston, Massachusetts, less than 48 hours late at my father's. I walked into Logan Airport in Boston, and of course my the family could come up to see you as you get off the airplane. I was one of the last kids because they put me way in the back of the airplane because I stunk. Okay, the stewardess was smart enough to do that. And thank God there was one guy, I don't know who he was, one civilian gave the stewardess a bunch of money, and she kept feeding me Jack Daniels and Cokes. And by the time I got off the airplane, I was half lit. But my family comes up to me, and of course my mother and my sisters are all crying, and my brother walks up and he puts his arm around me and he goes, "My God, you stink." But I was in Boston. I mean, I went from the combat zone, the combat zone from Vietnam to the streets of Boston in less than 40 hours. And that's a blur to me. I can tell you right now, I don't remember my father's wake, funeral, anything. I don't, So what happened then was, because it was toward the end of my tour, they basically compassionately reassigned me to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I never went back to Vietnam. I got out of the Army then in 70. Left, even though I wanted to be a career soldier because my father was passed away, my mother was elderly. I got out, went back to college eventually, and then went back in and did 24 more years for him. Got out again, worked in civilian life, retired in 2003 to Florida. And then 2006 for the war on terror, I volunteered to come back on active duty under a program called Operation Noble Eagle. I came back on active duty from 2006 to 2008 at Fort Rucker, Alabama, flying a desk. Because I became an Army aviator the second time. I went to flight school, went to officer candidate school, went to flight school, retired as a major. I went back on active duty 2006 to 2008, and I was going to re-retire again, and then the Army made me a job offer I couldn't refuse. I worked from about 2008 to about 2015, and then I finally fully retired. So.
You see any combat in your second stint in the Army?
No, I was unfortunately, that's why I wanted to go to to Afghanistan. During Desert Shield, Desert Storm, I was assigned a desk job at the United States Recruiting Command. And when you're assigned to the United States Recruiting Command, you ain't going nowhere. I called up branch and said, "I want to go." "No, you're staying exactly where you are." When Grenada was going off, I was in the 82nd prior to Grenada. I had to go to infantry. I had to go to my advanced infantry captain school at Fort Benning. I'm in there 2 months. The 82nd jumps into Grenada, so I missed Grenada. That made me mad. Then when Panama starts, I was in Korea, so I can't come from Korea to Panama. So when I volunteered for Operation Noble Eagle, they were in Army Times, which is the Army retirement magazine. They put out a call for retired field grade officers to come back on active duty to help the military, and I said okay. So I called up the branch. I called up the Army. I said, "Here's the deal. I want to go in theater." And they said, "Well, the first year you can't go in theater, but if you volunteer for 2 years, and the second year, I'll get you in theater." I should have known they were lying. Their lips were moving. Okay. Second year comes, I call up aviation branch and said, "Okay, I'm ready to go in the theater." "Oh, well, there's a slight problem now." I go, "Why?" "Well, the 2-star at Fort Rucker has to release you." That wasn't going to happen. I was sitting behind a desk. He wasn't going to release me from that desk to go there. So after that, I said, "If you ain't going to send me, I'm leaving." And then, of course, they made me the job offer, and I stayed. But that was because I wanted it, and people think I'm crazy. People thought I was crazy, one, for going back in 57. And they said, "Well, why are you doing that?" I said, "Well, would you ask a doctor why he wanted to make an operation after he retired, or go see an operation done, or still operate on people when he was older?" I was a professional soldier. Whether you realize it or not, combat's our Super Bowl. And I had experienced combat as 19 years old.
when I thought I was indestructible. I wanted to know what was the difference now as a grown man making decisions. Even when I was even for Grenada, I was a captain by then. I was a 30-something-year-old captain. If I'd gone to Grenada, it would have been a different perspective. I've been a company commander as a captain. How would I have changed from being a team leader as a 19-year-old for that to being a company commander? Or when Desert Shield, I was a major by then. I wanted to feel what was the difference in combat, experience in combat at those levels.
Right.
Maybe it's crazy, but that's who I was.
Yeah.
You know.
Looking back on it, how does your time in combat, how did that shape who you became?
It's changed my life.
Right.
You know, I'll give you a perfect example. Hugh Meredith, a guy I hardly knew, changed my life forever. I suffer from PTSD. I never thought I did. I thought I was Superman. And what I found out from PTSD, as you get older, you know, they have what they call late onset PTSD. And there's certain parts of PTSD, you can become a victim of PTSD, but what a lot of guys who stayed in the military were, and a lot of guys who have PTSD that didn't suffer, or we didn't think we suffered from it, is we took that anger and that depression and we funneled it. We funneled it into drive and making us a Class A. And this is and I didn't know this, but my shrink, I've learned a lot of this talking to my shrinks and my psychologist, is we took that and that drove us. That made me the type A. I was already a type A, but I just kept funneling that into what I did. I didn't have time for PTSD. I just didn't have time for it. But again, I was exposed to Agent Orange. The 25th Infantry Division, my division, was the most heavily exposed division in Vietnam. Our area of operations was the most sprayed, more exposure than any division in Vietnam. So I've already had ischemic heart disease. I've already had prostate cancer. Has it changed my life? Absolutely, combat has affected my life. It's going to affect how I die. I know that I'm going to die from something from PTSD, from Agent Orange. Yeah. PTSD, when I come back, we didn't, and I've talked to some, when we go back, one of the things we talk about when we go to the meetings, and it's therapeutic, is when we first all came back, we all self-medicated, we all drank. I mean, I was never into marijuana, but I mean, trust me, I really, really like Jack Daniels, okay? We'd get into fights, and I got into fights in college. I've been married 3 times, and that's not unusual for guys like me. You talk to my Vietnam buddies, a lot of ex-wives, a lot of drinking problems, a lot of anger problems. Yeah, we didn't know what PTSD was. We didn't understand what it was, but that's what it was. We had to vent, and that's how we vented. Yeah. And has it made me who I am? Yeah. Do I trust a lot of people? No. I don't. You know. Do I ever really get close to people? No. The closest person to me is my wife. You know, and the only reason I think I'm so close to her, my wife now, is because she's former military and she understands it, and she suffers from PTSD. So, yeah.
You volunteered for Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what you just said.
I'd go do.
Regrets at all?
No, I'd go do it. I'd do it again tomorrow.
Yep.
And in fact, last survey, 90% of all Vietnam veterans would do the same thing. The sad part about it, and one of the things that this is happening, is that I go around talking now. I'm very much into veterans group, and I do a lot of public speaking for people, and try to blow up the myths of Vietnam, or the way we were portrayed. Okay. The war in Vietnam, fought by draftees. No, it isn't. 2/3 of the war in Vietnam, 2/3 of the soldiers in Vietnam were volunteers. 2/3 of the guys' names in that wall over there were volunteers. The war was fought by Vietnam veterans were poor, uneducated people. They didn't go to high school. We came from middle class, lower middle class families. Okay, we were the highest educated veteran that ever went to war. 85% of all Vietnam veterans have a high school degree and higher. We committed suicide more. We used more drugs. We had less drug abuse per capita than the rest of society we lived in contemporaries. We had less suicides than our contemporaries.
Oh, by the way, Vietnam veterans on the average earn over 18% higher lifetime incomes than our brothers who did not serve. We are the most financially successful veterans in history. The Vietnam veterans were fought by African Americans. No, there wasn't Vietnam. African Americans made 12%, between 12 and 14% of the force in Vietnam. At the time, they were about 14 to 16% of the American population. So they were underrepresented in Vietnam. But that's not what you hear about us. And it's gone on for 50 years. And you look at movies like Platoon, Rambo. What is it? Apocalypse Now. That wasn't Vietnam. The closest thing to Vietnam was probably We Were Soldiers Once and Young with Mel Gibson about General Hal Moore. I mean, stop and think about it. The number one show on television in the 70s was a show about the Korean War. Well, that wasn't a show about the Korean War. That was an anti-Vietnam show, MASH. Where every military officer, everybody who was on the military side of the house or was a regular army was an idiot. Only the cool guys, the doctors, the living on the edge guys, the not conforming to society guys.
Unmilitary guys.
Unmilitary. Those were the heroes.
Right.
Yeah. A Few Good Men with Jack Nicklaus. Who were the heroes? The Harvard-educated lawyer, the female JAG officer. They were representing the dumb hillbilly from the mountains, and the African American kids were the victim of Jack Nicklaus. And oh, by the way, the victim was a Hispanic. Again, that's who we've been portrayed. That's what it's done to our society. And I got to be perfectly honest with you. This is great, and I think it's being done professionally and very nice. But this country is never going to get over Vietnam until we're gone, and may never get onto Vietnam. And it's, to me, Vietnam is changing point in society right up there with the Great Depression, the Civil War, and World War II. Our society today is because of Vietnam. What you're looking at is society today in Vietnam.
Absolutely.
And I will just give you a perfect example. I'm going to give you the three monuments, military monuments of the three major wars in the 20th century. World War II monument, what does it look like to you? It's majestic. Greek columns, breeze of all on the 50 states, fountains. You go to the Korean monument, you don't even know where it is. It's hid almost, because that's forgotten wall. When you look at the Vietnam Memorial, what do you see from a distance? What?
Tombstone.
Yeah. And not only a tombstone, a scar carved in the side of a mountain. You walk down to the Vietnam Memorial. I don't believe in coincidences.
Last question for you. Somebody watches this, and our intent in recording these interviews is so somebody will see this in 50 or 100 years and learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
What message would you like to send them about your service and about your fellow soldiers? What do you want them to know?
The American soldier, and I'm fortunate, I got to see the United States Army from 1967 to 2016. And I'm very involved with veterans organizations and dealing with soldiers today, the Ranger Regiment. The American soldier is one of, if not the finest soldier in Europe since the Roman Legion, then nobody is. He wants to be led. He wants to be taken care of. The Rangers who are in Afghanistan are as great as the Rangers who climbed the cliffs and the Point to Hawk, okay? I serve my country because I believe in this country. We are the last great hope of the earth. There is no country in the world like the United States. None. People don't leave us to go to Germany, or people don't leave us to go to Japan. People from those countries come here. Why? Ask yourself why. It's because who we are. And the American military has helped make that happen, whether we want to admit that or not. Every great empire
The Roman Empire lasted between 400 and 600 years. Do you know why? Because it had the greatest military force in history, the Roman legion. When the legion fell, Rome fell. When the British Empire fell, because of its navy and its military fell. When the Mongol Empire fell, it's because the Mongols lost their war-like things. Every great empire falls when their military falls. If you don't have a strong military, a strong defensive military, our military is the only military in history that doesn't go in to conquer people. We go in, we try to give them freedom, and we try to leave. Unlike other militaries in history. That's what the message I want to give. And we got to continue that. But the problem we're facing right now is that the United States military projects that less than 1% of the population will eligible to serve in this country. In 10 or 15 years, we're going to be a country of 350 million to 375 million. You do the math. Less than 10% of that population, less than 1% of that population can't defend that population. We're coming to a crossroads in this country. I'll be dead by then. But we are rapidly coming to a crossroads in this country. Where do we want to go? And you can't do it all through technology. You're going to have boots on the ground sometimes.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, sir, on behalf of the Americans in Wartime Experience, I want to thank you very much for sitting down and sharing your story.
My distinct honor and pleasure.
And although this can sometimes sound cliche, it's not. It's heartfelt. I want to thank you for your service and welcome home.
I know. Thank you very much.